I finally got one arm around his belly, my fingers digging into his wet fur as he struggled against gravity. His heart hammered so fast, I could feel it through my skin. "Easy, I've got you," I muttered, though the wind drowned my voice. My boots slipped once, grinding against the concrete pillar, but somehow my balance held. Inch by inch, I dragged him toward me until his front paws reached my shoulder. He clawed weakly at my shirt, whimpering, eyes rolling in panic. "It's okay," I whispered again, breathless, more for myself than for him. Then, with one last heave that tore a grunt out of my chest, I pulled him up against my chest. For a second, we both just froze there, two living things clinging to the side of a bridge, suspended between life and death. The world went quiet except for our breathing and the whisper of the wind against stone. I pressed my chin to his head. "You're safe now, buddy. You're safe." When I finally climbed back over the railing, a cheer went up from somewhere behind me. People had gathered, tourists, locals, maybe even a few who had only stopped out of curiosity. But now, every face wore the same look: relief. I set the puppy down carefully on the asphalt, and he immediately tried to stand, his legs trembling under him. His paw, one that had been hanging limp, barely touched the ground before he whimpered and pulled it back up. I knelt beside him, brushing dust and grit off his fur. "It's okay, little guy. We'll get that checked." His ears flicked weakly at my voice. Then, without warning, he leaned forward and pressed his head into my chest. That simple act, fragile, trusting, wordless, did something to me. I'd pulled hikers out of ravines, rescued lost kids, even fought off a mountain lion once, but nothing felt like this. Nothing hit me in the gut the way this small creature's silent surrender did. I wrapped him in my jacket and carried him to the Jeep. His weight barely filled my arms. The drive back to the ranger station was quiet except for his soft whimpers, and the sound of my heartbeats still hammering in my ears. Every few minutes I'd glance over, afraid he might slip away, but his eyes stayed half open, watching me, dazed but alive. At the station, I called the on-site vet. Dr. Lane was a calm woman with silver hair and hands that never shook, no matter how bad the case. When she saw the puppy, she frowned but smiled softly. "You picked a tough one, Ethan. Let's see what we've got here." She cleaned his paw, wrapped it, and checked his vitals. Dehydrated, malnourished, a few scrapes, and a sprain. But he'll make it. The words felt like sunlight after a storm. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath for hours. "He's lucky," I said quietly. Dr. Lane gave me a look. "Lucky, sure. But maybe you're the one who needed saving today." I didn't answer. I just looked at him, this trembling, broken little soul lying on the exam table. His breathing had evened out, his tail twitched faintly, and for the first time, I saw peace in his eyes. The next morning, I came back before sunrise. He was asleep, curled in a blanket in the corner of the clinic. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and cedar wood. I stood there for a minute, unsure what to do. Then his eyes fluttered open, and he saw me. That tail thumped once against the blanket. That was it. That was all it took. "Hey, partner," I said softly. "You remember me?" He blinked, then struggled to stand. His injured paw wobbled, but he didn't care. He limped toward me, head low, and I crouched down to meet him halfway. When his nose touched my hand, something unspoken passed between us. A promise, maybe, that neither of us would walk away. I spent the next week nursing him back to strength. I learned quickly that he wasn't like most dogs. He didn't bark much, didn't play, didn't even eat with excitement. Everything he did was quiet, deliberate, like he was still testing the world to see if it would hurt him again. But at night, when the park went silent and the desert stars burned bright, he'd curl up beside my cot, close enough that I could feel his warmth against my arm. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd hear him whimper in his sleep short, sharp sounds like echoes of fear. I'd rest a hand on his back, and he'd go still again. I started calling him River. It just fit. He'd come from the water, fought against it, and somehow survived. And like the river, there was something relentless about him, something that kept moving, no matter what. By the second week, River was walking better. He followed me on patrols, his nose always low to the ground, his ears twitching at every sound. People started to recognize him around the visitor center. Kids would stop to pet him, and he'd stand perfectly still, unsure but gentle. One afternoon, a family from New Mexico stopped by. Their little girl, maybe 6, knelt in front of him and whispered, "You're brave." River tilted his head, then licked her cheek. The look on her face, pure joy, made me laugh for the first time in weeks. I didn't realize how much I'd been carrying until that moment. River had a way of doing that, of making everything quieter inside. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the canyon rim, I sat on the edge of the overlook with River beside me. The wind was warm, carrying the scent of sagebrush. He leaned his head against my leg, and I watched the light fade from gold to red to violet. "You know," I said softly, "when I saw you on that bridge, I thought I was saving your life." He looked up at me, those amber eyes catching the last of the sun. But maybe it's the other way around. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. River grew fast, his body filling out, his coat glossy and strong. The first time I threw a stick, he chased it awkwardly, tripped, then looked back at me like he couldn't believe I'd done something so silly. By the 5th throw, he was running like the wind, ears flying, tail high. That was the day I saw him truly happy. The park staff adored him. Even tourists began asking about the rescue dog. Someone made a sign for the ranger station door. "River Assistant Ranger." I laughed when I saw it. But the truth was, he'd become just that. He had an instinct for people, especially the ones who were lost or afraid. One afternoon, a hiker came into the station, shaken and pale. She'd been separated from her group for hours. Before I could even speak, River walked up to her and sat quietly at her feet. She reached down, touched his head, and started crying. "It's okay," I said. "You're safe now." But I think it was River who told her that first. As the months went by, River and I became inseparable. He learned my routines, followed my every step, and somehow always knew when something was wrong. When I was buried in paperwork or late-night calls, he'd nudge my arm until I took a break. When storms rolled over the canyon and thunder shook the windows, he'd rest his head in my lap, calm and steady. But it wasn't until winter came that I realized how deep our bond had grown. It was a bitter January morning, frost on the pines. When we got a Kohler family stranded near the river bend, their truck stuck in mud. River jumped into the Jeep before I even grabbed my jacket. The drive was rough, the kind that rattled your bones. But when we reached the site, the family was huddled inside the cab, shivering. As I helped them out, River darted off, barking. I turned just in time to see him stop at the edge of a frozen patch where one of their kids had dropped a backpack. He grabbed it gently in his mouth and trotted back, tail wagging. The little boy's face lit up. He found it. River's tail thumped proudly. That small act, so simple, reminded me of the day I'd first seen him fighting to stay alive. He'd come a long way. We both had. That night, after the family was safe, we sat by the fire outside my cabin. River lay beside me, his head resting on my boot. Snow fell softly, melting against his fur. I watched the flames dance in his eyes and thought about how much he'd changed me. I used to think this job was about saving others, keeping people safe, following rules, doing my duty. But River taught me something different. Sometimes, it's not about rescuing someone else. It's about being rescued yourself, in ways you never expected. I reached down, scratched behind his ear, and said, "You did good today, partner." His tail thumped once against the ground. He didn't need words. Neither did I. Winter passed slowly in the canyon, each morning painted in silver frost and breath clouds that hung in the air like ghosts. River had grown into a strong young shepherd now, though that little fold in his left ear never quite straightened. I used to joke that it was his signature, a reminder of where he came from and what he'd survived. Sometimes, when we hiked along the river's edge, I'd catch him staring at the water, his reflection rippling below. Maybe he remembered, maybe he didn't, but I did. Every time I saw that blue current twist through the canyon, I thought of the ledge, of the scream, of how close we'd both come to losing everything. One morning, in early spring, The park was unusually quiet. The tourists hadn't yet returned, and the air was full of new lifebirds nesting in the cliffs, green buds pushing through the red dust. River trotted ahead of me on the trail, his tail high, nose twitching at the scent of everything waking up again. "You're getting faster," I said, watching him leap over a fallen log. He turned back, tongue lolling, eyes bright. That look pure joy made something tighten in my chest. I hadn't felt that kind of happiness in years. Not since before my divorce, before I'd started hiding in my work. River had filled the quiet spaces I used to avoid. He made the silence feel like home again. Later that day, while checking the West Ridge, I met an old man sketching the canyon in a weathered notebook. His hat was tilted low, his hands trembling slightly. River approached first, tail wagging politely. "Well, aren't you a handsome fellow?" the man said, patting River's head. "He's got good eyes." "Smart eyes." I smiled. "Yeah, he's seen a lot." The man looked at me, then back at River. "Funny thing about dogs," he said. "They don't save your life the way you expect. They just show up, and suddenly you realize you were lost." I didn't reply, but his words stayed with me. That night, as River dozed by the cabin door, I wrote those words down in my logbook. It wasn't regulation, but it felt important. As spring turned to summer, River and I became something of a legend among the regular hikers. People would stop by the ranger station just to ask about the bridge dog. Some brought toys or treats. Others left notes. One little boy mailed a drawing of River with a red cape, titled "The Hero of the Canyon." I pinned it on the office board. River seemed to know the attention was for him. He carried himself differently, now head high, eyes steady. But every night, when it was just the two of us, he was still that same quiet soul who'd lean against me and sigh, content to exist in the shared stillness. Then came August, the monsoon season. Storms rolled in from the south, filling the canyon with thunder that shook the ground. One evening, I was called to check a landslide near the east rim. River, of course, jumped into the Jeep before I could stop him. "You're staying in the truck this time," I warned. He tilted his head as if pretending to listen, then wagged his tail and settled into the passenger seat. The rain hit halfway through the drive. Sheets of water blurred the windshield, lightning flashing across the cliffs like veins of fire. When I reached the site, the road had partially collapsed. A pickup truck was stranded on the other side, its headlights barely visible through the storm. A man was waving frantically. I radioed dispatch, but the signal crackled and died. The only way across was a narrow strip of ground slick with mud. "Stay," I told River, but he was already pacing, sensing the urgency. I stepped out, the rain soaking through my clothes instantly. Each step sank deep into the muck. Halfway across, a low rumble echoed through the canyon rocks shifting above. I looked up and froze. A boulder, loosened by the storm, was tumbling straight down. I barely had time to react before River's bark cut through the noise. He launched from the truck, sprinting toward me. "No," I shouted, but it was too late. The boulder hit the edge, exploding into fragments. One struck the ground near me, throwing mud and water everywhere. When the dust cleared, I saw River lying a few feet away, whimpering. Panic surged through me. I ran to him, heart pounding. His back leg was pinned by a chunk of rock. "Hang on, buddy." I heaved against it, pain shooting through my arms, but it wouldn't move. Rain hammered harder, thunder rolling overhead. I jammed my shoulder under the edge of the rock and pushed again, this time with everything I had. With a groan, it shifted just enough. River yelped as I pulled him free. He tried to stand, but couldn't. I lifted him into my arms, his fur heavy with rain. He buried his head against my chest, trembling. I didn't care about the stranded truck anymore. I just ran. Back to the Jeep, back to safety. When we reached the clinic, Dr. Lane was already waiting. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. "He's lucky again," Ethan bruised. "Maybe a fracture, but he'll heal." I sat beside him for hours, watching his chest rise and fall. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd run danger toward me. When he awoke, his eyes met mine, and I realized something. He hadn't saved me out of instinct. He'd saved me because I was his person. That night, as the storm passed, I sat by his side and whispered, "You don't owe me anything, River. Not a damn thing." He sighed softly. The kind of sound that says more than words ever could. Days turned into weeks again. River healed, slowly but surely. His limp faded, replaced by that confident stride I'd grown used to. But something had changed. He stayed closer now, always within arm's reach, as if keeping an eye on me, and I found myself talking to him more about the canyon, about life, about things I'd never told anyone. It didn't matter that he couldn't answer. He understood in ways most people never could. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I took him to the bridge. The same bridge where it all began. The repairs were done now. The railing gleamed new. I stood there for a long time, staring at the river below. River sat beside me, ears perked, eyes calm. "You know," I said, "sometimes I still see it. That moment you slipped. Feels like it happened yesterday." River nudged my hand, then rested his chin on the railing, gazing at the water. I smiled. "Yeah, I guess we're both still hanging on, huh?" We stayed like that until the stars came out, the canyon glowing faintly in the moonlight. That night, back at the cabin, I pulled out the old sketchbook the man had given me months ago. On the first page, I wrote, "Not all rescues come with sirens. Some come with fur and trust and eyes that see right through you." As the years passed, River became more than my companion. He was my shadow, my anchor, my proof that even in the harshest places, kindness survives. He learned commands, helped with search operations, and once even found a lost boy by scent alone. The park officially registered him as a rescue dog, though everyone already knew he'd been one long before that. The boy's mother sent me a letter afterward. "You didn't just save my son. You gave us hope again." I kept that letter in my logbook, right next to the note about the old man's words. Seasons came and went, each one carving new memories into the canyon walls. River aged gracefully, his muzzle graying, his pace slowing. But his spirit never dimmed. Even in his final years, he'd greet every sunrise with the same quiet dignity, the same spark that first pulled him back from the edge. And when the day finally came, it was gentle, peaceful. I awoke to find him lying beside my bed. His breathing soft, his eyes half open. The morning light caught in his fur, turning it gold. I reached down, placed a hand on his side. "Hey, partner," I whispered. His tail thumped once, slow and steady. Then, like the river we both loved, he drifted away. I buried him by the overlook, where the wind never stops singing and the sky seems endless. I marked the spot with a small stone engraved with one word, River. For weeks, the cabin felt empty. Every sound, every shadow reminded me of him. But one evening, while walking the trail alone, I heard the faint bark of another dog in the distance. I turned, half expecting to see him bounding toward me. Instead, a stray shepherd pup stood on the path, ribs showing, eyes wary but curious. He took one hesitant step forward, then another. I knelt, holding out my hand. "Hey there," I said softly. "You're safe now." He sniffed my fingers, then leaned in, pressing his head into my palm. I felt my throat tighten, but I smiled. "Welcome home, kid." The river roared below, steady and alive, and I swear, for a moment, in the whisper of the wind, I heard the faint thump of a tail.